Hey writers, today we have Candace Johnson from Change It Up Edits for a systemized self-editing masterclass. So I have been working with Candace for many years already. She has been with me since my very first published story and the sixth series and Popsicle that's coming out later this summer. And she's about to get a whole new series, well, new old series of novels that I'm working on. So I don't publish anything without Candace. She is a really elite professional in what she does. And so, Candace, why don't you tell us a little bit about where you are and what you do for writers and how you got into editing?
Okay, be happy to. Thanks for having me, by the way. I've been a freelance editor for I think about 10 years. And before that, working backward, I was kind of hybrid. I was doing some freelance work while I was still working for a publisher. But I started out in publishing actually as a college student who was looking for something to do career wise that wasn't teaching. I was training to be a teacher and I knew I wasn't passionate about that. I wanted something that really I felt passionate about. So I did a work study program with a publisher and absolutely fell in love with everything about the business. I loved reading the slush pile. I loved fixing mistakes in a document. I loved, just everything about it. And I thought, okay, this is what I want to do. So over the next year, worked part time with that publisher and just kept letting them know I was interested. I started getting some freelance work from them. And over about a year's time, an opening came up in the editorial department, and I became a proofreader for the managing editor. So I was getting documents that had already been developmentally edited, copy edited, proofread, and then I did the second proofread. From there, as I gained skill, I worked my way up the ladder. And by the time I left 8 years later, I was the managing editor of the department for a publisher that did mostly nonfiction, little tiny bit of fiction, but mostly nonfiction. And so that's how I started my freelance career as a nonfiction editor. There was something about fiction, though, as all of you know, that just grabs at your heart. There's something about the creativity of it and the differences between writing fiction and nonfiction that did appeal to me and still appeals to me. So I carry sort of a balance between the two in my work. And I find that they take different skill sets in many cases. They take a different part of my brain, is the way I like to say it. Fiction has rules, as everybody knows, but there are different sorts of rules, and there's a lot more leniency in breaking those rules. With nonfiction, you need to be pretty, at least with prescriptive nonfiction, which is what I work with primarily, you need to follow certain formats. And that that can get boring sometimes as an editor, because how many times can you correct a bullet list, and how many times do you say, and now we're going to talk about this. I do enjoy the back and forth between fiction and nonfiction. I think that as an editor, my main job is to not show. I should be the person who helps you shine as a writer. Whether you're beginning in your career or you're an established writer, my job is to take where you are and help you polish that work so that you're always improving, you're always finding a different way, a better way to hone your craft. And I really enjoy the one-on-one interaction with authors. That's the primary reason I left the publisher I was working for, because I was getting bogged down in sales meetings and catalog meetings and meetings, and I wasn't getting to work with the words, with the writers, and that's where I wanted to be. So in a nutshell, that's why I do what I do. I work from home like everybody else, but I've been working from home and coffee shops and libraries and everything else for the past 10 years or so. And about 6 years ago, my partner and I moved to Portland, Oregon, and that's where we live now. So anything
Well,
else you want to know?
I think you covered it very well. It's
Okay.
really interesting hearing about how you got into this and how you became a freelancer and that contrast of moving between fiction and nonfiction.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I think one thing that you mentioned is how you're not supposed to show. I think on one side, writers get frightened that the editor is going to change the way their writing sounds.
Hmm.
And then on the other side, there's the people who want to just give the editor a giant mess and then have the
Hmm.
editor write the book pretty much for them. So
Right,
you do
right.
neither.
Right. And I've had people come to me and say, I have a great idea. If I send you notes, can you write it? No, thank you. I'll write my own stories. Thanks. I don't really want to write yours. No, I think honoring an author's voice is a very primary job for an editor, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. You tell your story your way. My job is to try to figure out how to enhance that, how to fix sentence structure or mistakes or plot holes without rewriting your book for you. You don't want that, and I don't want to do it. So we're together on that. I had an author write to me. Oh, I could tell stories all day, but I've had authors write to me and say, um, I already had this edited and I was really disappointed because the editor completely changed my voice and it doesn't even seem like my story anymore. And that breaks my heart for the writer and for my side, for editors, because that's not what we do. You will never find an experienced editor who takes over your work. It just isn't done. So if somebody's trying to rewrite your story for you, run. It's not what an editor does.
Thank you for clarifying that because we have a lot of new writers in the group who have never worked with a professional editor, and it's good what that they know what to expect. And
Mhm.
this is really good advice for everyone out there. You do not want your editor to start rewriting all of your work. Well, speaking of editing, say you're a new writer and you just finished your novel or short story, like when do you start the self-editing process? Is this something that you do along the way or you wait till the end to do this?
Best practices suggest that you should get your draft written completely, put it away, get a little distance from it, and then come back to editing. In reality, I think most of us tend to reread our work and we play with it a little bit and we fix this and fix that. And when we come back to it the next day, we might like that or we might want to play with it some more, or maybe we go back to the original. Everybody has a different technique, but it really is important, I believe, especially if you're not working with an outline. It's really important to get your first draft down before you start tinkering with it. If you hit a roadblock, whether you have an outline or not, and you can't figure out where to go with your story, then you've probably got a situation where you need to do some revisions. But if you have the story completely, the idea in your head, even if things change and you go in different directions, keep writing, because while that creative hat is on, the juices are flowing and you're coming up with ideas and you're just interested in getting that story down. Once you start your revisions and your self-editing, you're wearing a different hat. You're reading like a reader instead of writing like a writer, and it is a different skill set.
Yeah,
So I
that's
think
interesting that you bring that up because I think a lot of us forget the brain has to kind of change gears and you do
mhm.
not want to get a short circuit by trying to do two things at once.
Edit too much editing while you're writing will kill your creativity. I think it makes you question your ability. You get that imposter syndrome going. What am I doing writing this? I don't know what I'm doing. I shouldn't be writing a book. This is crap. No, don't do that to yourself.
Right.
Live in the story, get it down on paper, on the computer, however you write, and then give it a chance to rest before you start really digging in and changing things. If you can.
That's another good thing that I forgot to include in our content was to let it rest first and
Mhm.
don't finish it in a whirlwind, and then go back and try to pick it apart already, let it settle, and then you go back and look at it with fresh eyes, right?
Mhm.
So we're talking about self-editing to prepare the manuscript to give to your editor, because you're not just going to give your editor a big, messy, sloppy first draft, right?
Right. And in fact, you'd be surprised the number of new writers who will send a first draft to an editor and expect it to be a polished piece, for practically no money when they're finished. And of course, everybody has a different level of ability when it comes to revising and self editing. You don't know what you don't know. But if you're a brand new writer and you really don't have any idea what to do to start editing and revising after you've written the piece, do some Googling. Think about what it is you think you might need some help with. Do you need some line editing help? Or do you think there might be some plot holes? Or do you need work with character development? There is a ton of free information on the internet. Best of all, ask other writers. Who do you follow? Whose stuff do you read? Whose books do you read? And whose advice blogs do you read? And that'll give you a good place to start.
Yeah, that's a great idea. That's part of why our writing community is so great. It's because
Yes.
we just don't have one mind. We have many minds who all some have been around the block many times, and some are just starting out, but everyone has their own wisdom to share. And
Yes.
yeah, it's best to check in with your fellow writers.